This is the video intended to accompany your notes for Chapter 8 in Business Communication class. This chapter is on positive and neutral messages. Chapter 9, by the way, is on negative messages, bad news messages, and Chapter 10 is on persuasive messages. And these chapters, as you might imagine, are sort of a set. They cover the broad range of types of business messages. As it so happens, I think I've mentioned this before in class, most messages are going to be positive. That is, you're sharing information that's going to be well received, or at least your audience is at least neutral to receiving that information. And so positive messages have a particular format that we'll mention. Negative messages, persuasive messages also have their own formats. But anyway, to get into this material, the first thing we do is talk about business letters. Business letters, of course, are a primary form of or channel for conveying information, especially to those outside the business. Business letters typically are going to be used when you're corresponding with an outsider. Within the business, you're going to be using more email, or you're going to be using memos. Memos are not really appropriate when you're dealing with those outside an organization. Those are strictly internal documents. Emails can go, of course, be for internal or outside use, but of course the format and the tone is going to be different depending on who you're sending the email to. Business letters are also helpful, or a good idea, when a permanent record is necessary, when you want to have that piece of paper to file away or to hold on to. And formality is important. You know, there's something about a letter, that the tangible nature of it, and because oftentimes it's going to be on company letterhead, and that's going to be impressive in its look and its feel. You know, if you got a job offer, you would expect to get that on company letterhead because it's official that way. And it's the sort of thing you'll hold on to and keep. I think I've still got the offer that I got years ago when I was getting out of college, the company that I first went to work with. I've got that letter somewhere hidden away. Formality is a hallmark of business letters. When a message is sensitive and requires an organized, well-considered presentation, you know, even if it's bad news, the business letter has a formality to it and a seriousness that if you're giving bad news, it can be very important for you to indicate that this is a serious matter, and it's not something, maybe the bad news is not something that's been arrived at, or that's being presented without a lot of thought. And so the letter itself carries that tone, that idea. We are going to very quickly review Guffey's 3x3 writing process. I hope this is a writing process that you are, as we are exposed to it, that you're becoming more comfortable with, and that it's something you'll take with you. It's just a really good approach. I think it's fairly unique, at least in its simplicity and its organization, to Guffey's book. And Guffey's is a very popular book in business comm classes. The writing process starts with phase 1, where it's really a pre-writing. You're planning your writing. So the first thing is to determine your purpose. Is the purpose of your message to inform? Is it to persuade? Is it to deliver good news, bad news? You know, what is it? What's the overall purpose? As I like to say, what does success look like? So with regard to a particular message, you're thinking as you're forming the ideas, before even writing a single word, you are thinking, you know, what do I really want out of this? Why am I writing? Or why am I actually sending this message? Part of your purpose is going to be, your purpose is going to influence to some degree even the channel that you use, whether you should write a letter or send an email or speak to someone face to face. Visualize the audience. This is part of what we have called taking the you view, putting yourself in the reader's shoes and thinking about how they will receive the message. What would they like to know? What would be most meaningful to them if it's information to be conveyed? If it's a bad news, for instance, or a persuasive message, what will be most meaningful to that person in having to accept the bad news, or to be persuaded to do whatever it is that you desire? And to anticipate the reaction to your message. In other words, put yourself in their shoes and think about how will they respond to this. And of course, that's going to help you decide what the proper format is of the letter or of your message. The second phase of the writing process is the actual writing itself. You collect information. If, for instance, you want to tell a client about a new product that you've got, you'll want to have all that information there, including availability and prices and those kind of things, or be able to refer them to the places where they can get all that detail. It doesn't mean, by the way, you have to tell everything you know about it, but if you want to tell a customer about a new product that's coming out, you want to give them what they would need to be able to take that next step, maybe to follow up with information, a request for more information, or to go to a website, or open up a catalog, that sort of thing. Organize into a list or an outline. In other words, you've got this information, you've decided your purpose and who it's for, how they're going to receive it. So how should you best organize this? As we'll see, when we deal with, or when we're conveying information through good news, when we're conveying good news, information that's going to be received positively, then we'll use what's called the direct approach. And we'll look at that in more detail very shortly. And then, of course, here you're actually composing the first draft. Phase 3 of the writing process is to edit for clarity and conciseness. Read through it. This is really looking for flow and to make sure that it reads well, that there are the proper transitions, the connectedness. You may find you need to break up your some of the longer paragraphs into shorter ones. It's the time for you to try to cut out all the unnecessary words. Be stingy with your words. Think about how you can make it as meaningful but concise as possible. Proofread for correctness and format. It doesn't matter how effective your message is otherwise. If there are typographical errors, it conveys a sense of sloppiness and lack of care and lack of concern. And then evaluate by putting yourself in the reader's shoes. That is, you're going to read through it now and rethink, who is this for? What's my purpose? How are they going to receive this? And then continue that cycle. In other words, then if you identify some information, for instance, that person would want to have, then you're going to go back and edit and add some of those things. If the tone is not good, or if maybe there's lack of parallelism and maybe a list or something, you're going to reevaluate that. You're going to make those corrections and then go through this process again very briefly, just to make sure that everything's square before you actually send it. Okay, for most of the good newsletters, actually all of them, you're going to be using the direct approach. Later on, we'll see actually in some cases where there's negative or bad news, you may use the direct approach, but that'll be the exception to the rule. But for the most part, most business communication is going to follow the direct pattern of organization. And that pattern is described right here on this slide. We front load in the opening. That is, we're going to reveal the news, the information. We're going to get to the point right off the bat. We're going to explain, that is, to provide any other supporting information or details in the body, and then be specific and courteous in the close. Okay, we're going to look at each one of these in turn. First of all, with respect to, I'm having trouble with my that thingy, the thingy that you advance the slides with. We're going to begin with the main idea. If you are sending a note of congratulations to someone, then get right to the point. Congratulate them on being named who's who, in American education, or receiving a promotion, or whatever it might be. Tell immediately why you are writing. So, get to the point. Number 2, explain in the body. Present any details that explain the request or response. It might be something, let's say, where we've invited someone, or you want to invite someone to speak at a CEO meeting, or an accounting society meeting, or the Marketplace Faith forum. That would generally be, because you're honoring someone in that way, that's going to be a positive message. And so you want right off the bat to invite them to speak. But of course, they'll need to know more to make a decision about whether they can come. You might, for instance, have to tell them that there's no funds for their travel reimbursement, so they'll have to pay for that themselves. And of course, you'd have to give the date and the time and the specific expectations. If they're going to be honored and they just have to show up at a dinner, that's one thing. If they're going to be honored and they have to show up at a dinner and make a 15-minute presentation, that's something else. Some people are just no honor is worth it as far as they're concerned if they have to speak publicly. But anyway, here in the body, you're going to be giving them those details that help them to understand what they need in order to do or to know in order to, let's say, to fully understand the information you want to convey. Sometimes it might be an announcement of a new product, and so in the first paragraph you tell them about that, the details about what that product will do, and availability, and how to purchase those. That would be in the body. Consider using graphic highlighting techniques. Graphic highlighting includes enumeration or use of bullet points, different types of fonts, or like italics, different colors of fonts and things like that, and sizes, in order to draw attention to certain information and in order to make it more understandable. That is, to make for a clearer message. If you've got a list of items, information, for instance, about a product, it can be much easier for that reader to digest that, to take it in, if you've got a list of those items, if they're in parallel form. And so graphic highlighting is a really good tool that you want to take advantage of. It can be overdone. If you've got one of these documents and it has 4 different colors of print on it, yellow and red and green, those kind of things, and excessive underlining and that sort of thing. It can really be distracting rather than helpful, but it's the sort of thing you want to be at least aware of. Being specific and courteous in the closing. If you're making a request, for instance, if you have invited someone to come speak, say, to a CEO meeting, then typically there needs to be a deadline. You've got a meeting that's coming up in 3 weeks or a month, and so you need to know from that person, let's say within the week, within a few days, so that you're not sitting there waiting and then finally have to follow up and find out that they never saw your email, or your message to begin with. So you want to give them a deadline that's reasonable, and then of course watch that deadline, and if they don't respond, make sure you follow up on it on a timely basis. Actually, one of the things that I have mentioned that I've found helpful is if you do email someone, and an email is a great idea to provide all that basic information that they might need to make a decision about a product or speaking opportunity, that sort of thing. It's a good idea, I think, even in the close, when to give them a deadline, and that deadline may be 3 or 4 or 5 days ahead, or maybe even a week. But I think it's a good idea to suggest or to tell that person that you're going to call them, within the next couple of days, just to make sure that they